It was a quiet evening on the remote outpost, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes even the tiniest sound feel loud. The human medic had spent the day tending to the usual injuries of travelers and workers, scrapes from maintenance accidents, mild burns from reactor repairs, and a few faint fevers. Life on the frontier was rarely exciting, but it was steady, and steady had a strange comfort to it. As he was finishing a routine check on a crew member, a faint signal pinged on the nearby scanner. It wasn't strong, but it was unusual some kind of crate or vessel left behind near the damaged landing pad outside the main compound. The scanner gave no details about the contents, only a simple, unknown biological matter detected. That usually meant trouble. The medic stepped outside, his boots crunching softly on the cold metallic ground. The sky stretched above, dotted with distant stars and faint nebula glows that reminded him of home, though home felt far away now. He followed the signal carefully, scanning for movement. As he approached the crate, a strange smell hit him, a mix of burnt ozone and something warm and faintly sweet. His brow furrowed, but curiosity won over caution. The crate was small, roughly the size of a human storage locker, and covered in alien markings that he could not read. They pulsed faintly, almost like they were alive, glowing in irregular patterns. The crate had clearly been dropped in a hurry. There were scorch marks on the edges, suggesting a rough landing, and the locking mechanism was damaged. It looked abandoned, left to the mercy of the harsh environment. He knelt beside it, placing a hand on the cold metal. His training told him to be careful. Biological crates could be dangerous, but there was something different about this. Something about the crate's quiet, desperate energy drew him in. He activated the emergency release latch, and the container hissed softly as it opened. Inside were small shapes curled together, barely bigger than a human hand. At first, he thought they might be alien infants, but their features were strange. Their skin was iridescent, shifting colors under the dim lights of the outpost. Tiny wings were folded tightly against their backs, and small, scaled heads rested on each other. Their eyes were closed, and each faint breath made the chest rise and fall like soft waves. The medic froze for a moment, disbelief catching him. He had read reports about alien dragons rare, dangerous creatures known to many as almost mythical, but he had never imagined he would see newborns, and certainly not abandoned ones, left to die. His heart raced. These creatures were fragile, vulnerable, and completely alone in a world they could not survive in without help. For a long moment, he just watched them. He noticed the faint tremble in their tiny limbs, the shallow, irregular breaths, the way their wings twitched as if they were struggling even in sleep. There was a quiet plea in their presence, a silent demand for help. The medic's mind raced. The rules of the outpost were strict interfering with alien species, especially ones considered dangerous, could get a human in serious trouble. But these were newborns, innocent. They had no choice, no way to protect themselves. He carefully lifted one from the crate. It was lighter than he expected, fragile almost beyond belief. Its scales shimmered softly in the dim light, and for a brief moment it opened one tiny eye. The eye was large and luminous, reflecting a mix of fear and trust. The medic felt a strange warmth spread through him. Something inside whispered that he could not leave them here. Not like this. He carried them back to the medical shelter, a small facility filled with basic equipment, some experimental tools, and a lot of human ingenuity. He laid the first hatchling on a soft, padded table and immediately noticed the problems. Its tiny body was weak, trembling, and its breathing uneven. The air temperature was too different from the one in the crate, and the oxygen levels were unfamiliar to such delicate lungs. He set to work, his hands steady despite the rush of emotions. He adjusted the breathing apparatus, carefully measuring airflow, He warmed the hatchling, monitoring its heart rate and pulse with devices adapted from human medicine. Every small movement it made, the slight flutter of its wings, the faint opening of its mouth, felt monumental. One wrong move could mean the end. Hours passed, and he worked tirelessly. He fed them tiny amounts of synthesized nutrients, made to approximate the energy they would get from their natural environment. He sang softly to them, speaking in a human tone that somehow seemed to soothe their tiny bodies. Gradually, he noticed small improvements. The tremors lessened, their breathing became steadier, and a faint spark of life glimmered in their tiny eyes. All the while, he felt the weight of the consequences. What if the Galactic Council discovered him? What if the aliens who had abandoned these hatchlings returned? The risks were enormous, but he could not stop. He was the only one here who could act. He had to try. As the night wore on, the hatchlings began to respond in subtle ways. One of them stretched its wings, a delicate, trembling motion, and let out a soft, almost musical chirp. Another blinked its large eyes and looked directly at him, tilting its head curiously. The medic felt a rush of hope. These tiny creatures, abandoned and thought to be doomed, were still fighting. And somehow, he was part of their fight now. Sleep was impossible. He stayed alert, observing every movement, adjusting temperatures, feeding small doses of energy. He whispered encouragements, telling them to hold on, telling them that someone was here who would not let them die. He felt a strange connection forming, one that went beyond species, beyond language. He was their protector, their lifeline, and they seemed to understand that, by dawn, the hatchlings had survived the first night. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Their tiny hearts beat more steadily, and the faint gleam of strength appeared in their scales. The medic leaned back, exhausted but satisfied. He knew the challenges ahead would be far greater, but for now, he allowed himself a rare moment of relief. Somewhere far across the stars, the aliens who had left these hatchlings might never understand the determination of a single human willing to save lives that others deemed worthless. But here, in this quiet outpost, life had been preserved. And in that preservation, a bond had already begun, a bond that would shape the futures of both the human and the newborn dragons. As the first rays of alien sunlight touched the shelter, the medic looked down at the tiny creatures and smiled. Faintly, they were alive. Against all odds, they had survived. And he would do everything in his power to make sure they stayed that way. The night after the medic discovered the abandoned hatchlings was long and restless. Even though the first night had ended with small victories, the real challenge was just beginning. These creatures were fragile beyond imagination, and their alien bodies did not respond to human medicine in the ways he expected. Every breath they took, every small flutter of their wings, required constant attention. The medic had set up a small room in the shelter specifically for them. It was quiet, insulated from the outside noises of the outpost. Lights were dimmed to a soft glow, because the hatchling's eyes seemed sensitive to bright illumination. He had improvised small warming pads to keep their tiny bodies at a consistent temperature, and the air was carefully filtered to remove any foreign particles that might harm them. Every device, every tool, had been adjusted to suit creatures he barely understood. As he checked on the first hatchling, he noticed its tiny chest rising and falling unevenly. One of its wings twitched in an odd rhythm, not like anything he had seen in human or animal infants. He held it gently, feeling the faint pulse of life in its tiny body. It was delicate, almost unreal, like holding a shard of glass that could shatter if he moved too quickly. He fed them a small dose of synthesized nutrients designed to mimic what their species might need. But even this was tricky. Their stomachs were tiny, and too much could harm them. He had to monitor their digestion carefully, watching for any sign of discomfort or distress. It was a slow, painstaking process, but he was determined. Leaving them to fend for themselves was not an option. Hours passed as he alternated between feeding, adjusting their environment, and monitoring their vital signs. Every small improvement gave him hope. When one hatchling finally blinked and opened its eyes fully, looking straight at him, he felt a warmth spread through his chest. It was as if the tiny creature understood that he was there to protect it, but progress was not linear. One hatchling suddenly began to tremble violently, its breathing shallow and erratic. Panic surged through him. He quickly adjusted the oxygen level and checked its temperature. Nothing seemed to stabilize it. His hands moved with precision, recalling every lesson he had learned in human medicine, but also improvising constantly. He applied gentle pressure to its wings, checked its tiny heart with a sensitive scanner, and whispered words of encouragement. Slowly, the trembling eased, and its breath returned to a more normal rhythm. Despite his exhaustion, he could not leave. Every moment mattered. He rotated through the hatchlings, ensuring that none were neglected. He discovered that each had its own quirks. One responded positively to gentle humming, another calmed when he spoke softly, and a third seemed to prefer being held against his chest. It was strange to feel such connections to creatures that were completely alien, yet their trust in him was immediate and unmistakable. By mid-morning, he realized that the hatchlings had begun to interact with each other in small ways. They nuzzled together, chirped softly, and sometimes even attempted tiny flutters of their wings in unison. The medic watched them with a mixture of awe and relief. These were not just surviving, they were beginning to respond, to show life and energy. But he knew the danger was far from over. Their bodies were still weak, and any sudden change in environment could undo all the progress. A minor drop in temperature, a sudden noise, or an unexpected interruption could be catastrophic. He carefully reinforced the room, using soft barriers to protect them and maintaining a quiet, controlled atmosphere. While tending to them, he thought about how these hatchlings had ended up abandoned. Perhaps the aliens who left them had seen them as too weak or too different. Perhaps they had judged them by appearances alone, unaware that life is always worth protecting. He could not understand their reasoning, but he could understand life itself. That was enough. Time passed slowly. He had not eaten, barely slept, and had not left the room for more than a few minutes. His hands ached, his eyes burned, but he ignored it. Every small movement of the hatchlings mattered more than his own fatigue. He observed one hatchling stretching its wings, the delicate membranes glinting in the dim light, and felt a spark of joy. It was a small creature, fragile and odd, yet full of determination. The hatchlings began to respond to his presence in more obvious ways. One reached out a tiny claw as he approached, another chirped when he hummed, and yet another seemed to calm whenever he adjusted the temperature just slightly. They were learning, adapting, and slowly trusting him. It was remarkable to witness, but it also reminded him of how delicate the balance still was. One misstep could undo everything. As evening approached, the medic realized that they were not just dependent on him, they had started to communicate in their own ways. Small chirps, wing twitches, and soft movements conveyed their needs and feelings. He began to understand their subtle language, interpreting their tiny actions as signals for warmth, food, or comfort. It was as if he had been given a chance to step into a completely new world, one where human medicine and alien life intersected in ways he had never imagined. Throughout the night, he continued to monitor them. The shelter became a place of quiet tension and hope. He made notes, adjusting his techniques, trying new methods, and recording every small improvement. Each hatchling's survival was a victory, each tiny sign of strength a promise that they might make it through the coming days. He knew that the real challenge was only beginning. While he could keep them alive for now, the long-term survival of these hatchlings would require constant care, knowledge, and courage. And the larger universe, with its rules and councils, might not look kindly on a human who interfered with alien life. But for now, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that these tiny creatures, abandoned and left to die, had a chance. As dawn approached again, he sat back and watched them rest. Their tiny chests rose and fell steadily. Their small wings occasionally fluttered, and one even nestled against his arm, as if seeking reassurance. He felt a deep sense of responsibility and a quiet pride. They were surviving, thriving even in their own small way, and he had made it possible. The medic realized that this night and every night to come would not be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of fear, and challenges he could not yet foresee. But he also understood that this was his path now. These hatchlings had been abandoned, left alone in a universe that did not care for them. But he did, and he would not let them die. It was the beginning of something extraordinary, not just for the hatchlings, but for him as well. In saving them, he was discovering something about his own courage, compassion, and determination. And in their trust, he found a connection that transcended species, distance, and expectation. The small hatchlings, abandoned and almost lifeless just hours ago, were now stirring, alive, and responding. They were fragile, yes, but also full of potential, ready to grow stronger under his care. And he knew that every moment mattered. Every touch, every adjustment, every small act of patience and care was shaping their future. For the human medic, the quiet of the outpost had never felt more alive. The small sounds of life, the gentle chirps, the flutter of wings, the soft rustle of scales, reminded him why he had chosen this path. In a universe so vast and often indifferent, the act of saving a life, even one so small and strange, was a triumph. And so he worked through the night, the faint glow of the hatchling scales illuminating the room like tiny stars. He would continue hour by hour, step by step, because now he was not just a medic. He was a protector, a guardian, the lifeline between survival and oblivion. And for these small, abandoned dragons, his presence was the difference between life and death. By the fourth day, the hatchlings had begun to show remarkable signs of growth. Their tiny wings were no longer weak membranes. They had a subtle strength, enough that they sometimes tried to lift themselves off the padded surfaces of the shelter. Their scales shimmered brighter in the dim light, and their small, curious eyes followed every movement of the medic. He had never experienced such a connection with any creature before. Each chirp, each little movement, felt like a message, a recognition of trust and safety. But with the hatchlings' growth came new risks. Their sounds and movements had attracted attention. Unseen scanners from distant patrols had detected unusual biological activity at the outpost. By midday, a communication alert flashed across the medic's console. The message was brief, cold, and authoritative. The Galactic Council demanded immediate explanation for the presence of alien dragon hatchlings in a human-controlled facility. The medic read the message several times, his chest tightening with unease. The Council was not known for leniency. They were the governing body for interstellar species, responsible for maintaining the balance between humans and countless alien civilizations. Interfering with alien life, especially one considered dangerous or sacred, could carry severe consequences. Yet, as he looked at the tiny creatures resting peacefully on the pads, he felt a surge of determination. He could not abandon them. He replied carefully, using precise language to avoid provoking unnecessary conflict. He explained that the hatchlings were abandoned, left to die on a damaged landing pad, and that he had acted to save lives. He emphasized their fragility and the impossibility of surviving without immediate care. The reply was sent, But he knew the council would not be satisfied with words alone. They would likely send observers, inspectors, or even enforcers. As he prepared for the possibility of a confrontation, he focused on the hatchlings. They were unaware of the politics and dangers surrounding them, yet their very survival depended on him navigating this complex interstellar bureaucracy. He adjusted the warming pads, checked their feeding tubes, and made sure the shelter was secure. He spoke to them softly, telling them not to be afraid, even though fear coiled tightly in his chest. Hours later, a transmission arrived. The council's message was stern. He was ordered to hand over the hatchlings immediately, no questions asked. Their language left no room for negotiation, their tone leaving a clear implication failure to comply could result in severe penalties, even imprisonment. The medic stared at the screen, weighing his options. Handing them over would mean certain death for the hatchlings. Keeping them meant defying the most powerful authority in the galaxy. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility. The hatchlings were small, innocent, and completely dependent on him. He could not abandon them, no matter the risk to himself. His decision was made. He would protect them. He would find a way to care for them while navigating the looming threat of the council. That evening, as he continued to monitor their progress, there was a knock at the shelter door. His heart skipped a beat. He knew that outsiders could be coming inspectors, enforcers, or even alien observers. He opened the door carefully, and to his relief, it was not a council agent, but a local worker delivering supplies. The worker noticed the hatchlings and gasped softly. "Are those dragons?" They whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. Medic nodded, keeping his voice calm. Yes, they were abandoned. They would have died without help. He quickly ushered the worker away from the enclosure, careful not to expose too much. Word could travel quickly, and he could not risk attracting more attention until he had a plan. Over the next few days, he prepared for potential inspections. He reinforced the shelter, created detailed logs of the hatchlings' health, and documented every step of their care. He knew that evidence of their condition could be crucial if he needed to defend his actions before the council. Each hatchling grew stronger, their scales gaining a subtle metallic sheen, their small claws becoming more defined. Their wings stretched and flexed with increasing coordination, and their movements became more confident, though still cautious. One night, while observing them, he noticed something extraordinary. The hatchlings began interacting with each other in ways he had not seen before. They chirped softly, nuzzled one another, and even attempted small, coordinated movements with their wings. It was as if they were learning from each other, communicating in their own way and adapting to their environment. The medic watched in awe, realizing that their survival instincts were kicking in, shaped by his care and guidance. Despite this progress, anxiety remained. Every alert from the outpost scanners made his heart race. Any moment, he feared, council inspectors could arrive, demanding the hatchlings be handed over. He thought about what would happen if they were taken away, if they were returned to the aliens who had abandoned them, or worse, eliminated for being deemed defective. The thought was unbearable. He could not let that happen. As the days passed, the hatchlings grew bolder. One of them, the smallest of the group, attempted to climb onto his shoulder, its tiny claws gripping gently, its head tilted curiously. The medic laughed softly, a sound full of relief and affection. He had never felt such a bond with any creature. They trusted him completely, and he, in turn, felt a protective instinct he had never experienced before. But the looming threat of the council could not be ignored. The medic knew he had to find a way to justify his actions, to show that these hatchlings were not just surviving, but thriving because of his intervention. He began compiling data, heart rates, growth measurements, feeding logs, and environmental adjustments. Every observation was meticulously recorded, every small improvement noted. If he could present evidence of their potential, perhaps the council would reconsider. Then, on the fifth night, an alert flashed on the monitor. A signal from a council scout ship was approaching the outpost. The scout would arrive within hours, likely carrying inspectors authorized to enforce the order to surrender the hatchlings. The medic's heart pounded. He quickly made final preparations, ensuring the hatchlings were comfortable, secure, and as safe as possible. He whispered to them softly, telling them not to be afraid, that he would protect them. When the scout ship arrived, the medic observed from a safe distance. The council inspectors disembarked, their suits sleek and imposing. They moved with authority, scanning the shelter with advanced sensors. He could feel their eyes on him, judging, questioning, demanding compliance. The hatchlings sensed the tension as well, their small bodies huddling together. The lead inspector spoke, their voice formal and commanding. "Human medic, you are ordered to surrender the alien hatchlings immediately. Interference with alien species is prohibited under council law." The medic met their gaze calmly, his voice steady despite the fear tightening in his chest. These hatchlings were abandoned. They were left to die. I could not let that happen. Their survival depends on care they cannot receive anywhere else. The inspectors scanned the hatchlings carefully. To their surprise, the creatures were healthy, breathing steadily, and showing signs of growth. The inspector exchanged a glance with a colleague, an expression of uncertainty briefly crossing their otherwise stoic features. The medic seized the opportunity to explain, showing them his logs, feeding schedules, and environmental controls. He emphasized that every intervention had been necessary to preserve life. For a moment, the tension hung thick in the air. The inspectors were silent, their scanners verifying the medic's claims. Finally, the lead inspector spoke, though not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "Your actions are unusual, but the evidence of their survival is undeniable. Council, review is required before any further orders can be issued." The medic exhaled, relief washing over him. It was a temporary reprieve, but it was enough. The hatchlings chirped softly, as if sensing the change, and one even stretched its tiny wings in a small gesture of newfound energy. The medic smiled, kneeling beside them. He had not only kept them alive, but had also bought them time, a chance to thrive, to grow, and perhaps to change the way the galaxy viewed them. That night, as the inspectors departed, the medic watched over the hatchlings with renewed determination. He knew the council would continue to monitor the situation, and challenges were far from over. But for now, he had defended life against indifference, and the hatchlings had responded with courage and growth. He realized that this was not just a test of skill, but of heart, patience, and compassion. The bond between human and hatchlings had strengthened beyond words. Each small chirp, each delicate movement, was a reminder that life, no matter how alien or fragile, deserved protection. And as the stars twinkled faintly through the shelter windows, he made a silent vow. He would do everything in his power to keep them safe, no matter the cost. After the encounter with the council inspectors, the human medic felt a mix of relief and renewed determination. The hatchlings had survived the immediate threat, but their real journey was just beginning. Now that they were stable, it was time for them to grow stronger and adapt to life under his care. Each day was a mixture of hope and careful attention, a delicate balance that demanded patience, skill, and empathy. The hatchlings began to show remarkable signs of development. Their wings, once fragile and almost translucent, now displayed subtle patterns and strength. When they stretched or twitched, it was no longer a simple reflex, but a purposeful movement. The medic observed them carefully, noting how each one had its own personality. One was bold and curious, always exploring the edges of the enclosure. Another was shy, curling up whenever he approached, but gradually warming to his presence. The smallest one, who had been the weakest, now displayed bursts of energy, chasing its siblings in clumsy but spirited movements. The medic spent hours every day adjusting their environment. He learned how to regulate the temperature to match their natural preferences, how to create airflow that mimicked the gentle breezes of their home planet, and how to provide food that gave them energy without overwhelming their delicate systems. He experimented carefully, observing how each hatchling reacted. Sometimes a tiny movement or a flicker of color would signal contentment. Other times, a slight hiss or flutter meant discomfort. Over time, he became fluent in their subtle language. As the hatchlings grew stronger, they began interacting more with him and each other. The boldest one would attempt to climb onto his shoulder during feeding, its tiny claws gripping gently but confidently. He laughed softly at the sight, feeling a warmth he had never known before. The shy one would watch from a distance, but gradually inched closer, responding to his calm voice and gentle touch. The smallest, once the weakest, began to show sparks of curiosity, exploring the padded floor and even attempting short, uncoordinated leaps. One morning, he noticed something extraordinary. While the hatchlings were playing together, tiny sparks of bioluminescent light began to glow along their scales. The sparks were weak at first, flickering like fireflies, but they became brighter with each passing day. The medic realized that these were not just decorative flashes. They were signs of life energy, a natural ability of their species. He carefully recorded the phenomenon, understanding that this was a critical stage of their development. The hatchlings were not just surviving, they were beginning to thrive in ways that were astonishing. The days turned into weeks, and the hatchlings continued to grow. Their scales hardened slightly, providing a delicate armor that reflected light in soft, shimmering patterns. Their wings grew more capable, and soon they were able to lift themselves briefly off the padded surfaces, hovering with surprising control. The medic encouraged them gently, providing safe spaces for them to experiment with flying. He cheered silently as one managed a short glide across the room, landing carefully on a soft mat. The joy in their eyes, if one could call it that, was undeniable. During this time, the medic also observed their intelligence. They responded to his voice and gestures in increasingly complex ways. When he hummed a tune, one would attempt to mimic the rhythm with soft chirps. They learned to recognize his presence and anticipated his movements. Feeding time became a coordinated dance, with each hatchling taking turns and signaling their readiness. It was as if they were learning not just survival, but trust, communication, and cooperation. Despite these successes, challenges remained. The hatchlings were still vulnerable to sudden changes in environment. One afternoon, a minor power fluctuation caused a brief dimming of the lights and a drop in temperature. The hatchlings huddled together, shivering, and the medic rushed to adjust the controls. He wrapped each one gently in padded blankets, monitored their vital signs, and soothed them with his voice. The experience reminded him that even small disturbances could have serious consequences. As the hatchlings grew, their unique traits began to emerge more clearly. One had a slight curve in its horns, a feature that set it apart but did not impede its movements. Another had patterns along its wings that shimmered like tiny constellations. The medic marveled at these individual differences, understanding that each hatchling was not just a survivor, but a unique being with its own potential. He began to see them not as creatures to be saved, but as beings with lives that could shape the future. One evening, he was startled by a new behavior. One hatchling, perched on a low platform, emitted a soft pulse of light from its body. The light expanded and retracted rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. The medic observed closely, realizing that this was a form of communication he had not seen before. Soon, the other hatchlings responded, pulsing their own light in subtle synchronization. It was a remarkable display of instinct, intelligence, and social bonding. The medic felt a deep sense of awe and responsibility. He was witnessing something extraordinary, something that went beyond simple survival. While he focused on the hatchlings, he also remained aware of the larger threats. The Galactic Council was still monitoring the outpost, and there was always the possibility of alien observers returning. The medic knew that his care for the hatchlings could be challenged at any time, but he also knew that the bond he had formed with them was real and undeniable. They trusted him completely, and he was determined to protect them, no matter the cost. The hatchlings began to develop small, playful behaviors that were both endearing and fascinating. They would chase one another in loops, tumble gently over each other, and sometimes curl up together in tight, warm clusters. The medic noticed that these interactions strengthened their coordination and motor skills. Each day, they became more agile, more confident, and more capable of interacting with their environment. Feeding became more complex as well. The hatchlings were learning to coordinate, taking turns and signaling hunger or satisfaction with tiny chirps and gestures. The medic adapted, providing small portions and observing their interactions. He was amazed at how quickly they learned, how naturally they began to understand patterns, timing, and even the presence of each other as individuals. It was a level of intelligence and awareness he had not expected in such young creatures. Despite their growing strength, vulnerability remained. The medic had to be vigilant at all times. One hatchling began to show signs of fatigue after a particularly active session of wing flutters and play. He immediately adjusted the environment, providing warmth and gentle reassurance. Another had a minor feeding complication, which he resolved with careful attention and precise monitoring. Every success was hard-won, every setback a reminder of how delicate life could be. As the hatchlings grew, so did their bond with him. They began seeking his presence, chirping softly when he entered the room, nuzzling against his hands, and even curling around his wrist while he worked. He had never experienced such trust from any creature, human or alien. It was a humbling, almost sacred responsibility. He realized that their survival depended not just on medical care, but on empathy, patience, and genuine connection. By the end of the month, the hatchlings had transformed from fragile, abandoned infants into small, energetic beings full of life and curiosity. Their scales glimmered, their wings were functional, and their intelligence was evident in every action. The medic looked at them with pride, knowing that he had nurtured not just life, but potential. They were no longer simply surviving, they were thriving. In that quiet outpost, far from the bustling centers of the galaxy, a human medic and a group of alien hatchlings had formed an extraordinary bond. Against all odds, against abandonment and indifference, life had flourished. And as the hatchlings chirped, flapped, and pulsed their light in joyful synchronization, the medic understood something profound. The act of care, the willingness to protect and nurture, had created not just survival, but a new beginning. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, hope shone brighter than the stars outside. The hatchlings were alive, thriving, and learning. They had come from the brink of death to a place of growth and possibility. And the medic, their unwavering guardian, knew that together they had the power to face whatever challenges awaited them, whether from the galaxy or from life itself. The outpost had been quiet for days, the hatchlings thriving under the careful attention of the medic. Their wings were stronger, their scales glimmered with patterns unique to each, and their intelligence and awareness had grown beyond what anyone had expected. The medic was proud of their progress, but he also knew the peace was fragile. The galaxy was not a forgiving place, and news traveled fast. One morning, The scanners detected an approaching ship, unlike any patrol or scout he had seen before. It was larger, sleek, and carried a sense of authority that made even the automated sensors pause. The human medic's heart sank. He immediately recognized the markings. This was the alien tribe that had originally abandoned the Hatchlings. They had arrived to reclaim what they considered theirs. The medic's mind raced. He knew they would not understand his care, his reasons, or the bond that had formed. They had abandoned these creatures once. Now they expected to enforce their traditions without question. The landing was precise and deliberate. The alien tribes. Emissaries stepped onto the outpost grounds, moving with a grace that spoke of their species' discipline and pride. Their eyes scanned the area with suspicion, and when they saw the Hatchlings, they froze. The tiny creatures were no longer weak or trembling. They were alert, moving with energy and confidence, wings twitching in curiosity, their scales reflecting. The dim lights. The lead alien approached the medic, their voice carrying authority and an edge of anger. "Human," they said, "you have interfered with our ways. These Hatchlings were abandoned for a reason. You have no right to claim them." The medic met their gaze steadily, his own voice calm but firm. "They were left to die. I could not let that happen. They are alive because of care, not neglect. You abandoned them. They are not yours to claim until they are strong enough to survive." The aliens paused, exchanging glances. The pride of their species had been wounded by the survival of creatures they had deemed unworthy. They expected weakness, not life. The medics sensed the tension in the air and understood that this confrontation would not be simple. Words alone would not convince them. They needed to see the Hatchlings for themselves. He opened the shelter and allowed the aliens to observe. The Hatchlings, sensing the presence of unfamiliar beings, did not cower. They chirped softly, their wings fluttered, and the smallest glowed, faintly in a pulse of bioluminescent light. The aliens watched, astonished. These creatures, once considered weak and abandoned, were thriving. Their health, intelligence, and energy were undeniable. The lead alien's voice softened slightly, though pride still colored their tone. "They should not have survived," they murmured. "We left them to follow our traditions." "How?" The medic explained carefully, detailing the care, feeding, and environmental adjustments he had made. He spoke not just of survival, but of the bond, the trust, and the potential of the Hatchlings. "They responded to care," he said. "Life deserves a chance, even when tradition says otherwise." For hours, the alien tribe observed. They watched as the Hatchlings played together, pulsed their lights in small rhythms, and even responded to the medic's voice. Slowly, doubt began to creep into their expressions. The traditions they had followed so strictly now seemed flawed. They had judged life too quickly, assuming weakness where there was potential. The smallest Hatchling, once frail and trembling, now demonstrated energy and curiosity that challenged their beliefs. One of the younger aliens stepped closer to the creatures, extending a hand cautiously. A Hatchling approached, chirping softly, and nuzzled against the hand. The gesture, simple as it was, spoke volumes. The aliens began to understand something fundamental. Life cannot always be judged by initial appearances. Strength, resilience, and potential often reveal themselves only through care and opportunity. The lead alien spoke again, this time with a tone of reflection. "Perhaps we were wrong," they admitted quietly. Their pride still lingered, but acknowledgement of error was present. The medic nodded, understanding the delicate balance. The Hatchlings had survived because of compassion and persistence, and now the aliens were forced to confront their own judgment. The interaction was not without tension. Some members of the tribe remained skeptical, their expressions rigid, unwilling to accept that the humans' actions had preserved life. The medic remained patient, allowing observation and gentle explanation to speak louder than argument. Slowly, the hatchling's thriving state began to win over even the most doubtful of the aliens. Over the next several hours, a subtle shift occurred. The tribe, humbled by the undeniable survival and growth of the hatchlings, began to accept the human medic's role. They could not reverse their previous abandonment, but they recognized that the hatchlings' lives had value. They acknowledged that the medic had done what their traditions had failed to accomplish. Protecting life and nurturing potential. The hatchlings themselves seemed to sense the change. Their movements became more confident, their chirps more vibrant, and their wings twitched with playful energy. The bioluminescent light pulsed gently, a display of trust and recognition. The medic watched, understanding that this was not only a victory for the creatures, but a subtle teaching moment for the alien tribe. Compassion, care, and patience had triumphed over rigid tradition. The lead alien finally spoke with measured respect. These hatchlings, they are stronger than we expected. Their survival is proof that life must be judged with care, not assumption. You have shown wisdom in nurturing what we abandoned. The medic nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. He had protected life, defended the hatchlings against indifference, and now the aliens themselves were recognizing the value of that care. In the days that followed, the alien tribe remained at the outpost, observing and interacting cautiously with the hatchlings. They learned from the medic, seeing firsthand the techniques he used to ensure their growth. Feeding schedules, temperature adjustments, and gentle handling were demonstrated. The aliens began to adopt a new perspective, understanding that life, even fragile and alien life, required attention, empathy, and patience. For the hatchlings, the presence of their original species did not cause fear. Instead, they displayed confidence, curiosity, and trust. They responded to the aliens' gestures, chirping and pulsing their lights in recognition. The bond they had formed with the human medic was evident, yet their capacity to interact positively with the tribe showed the potential for harmony and understanding across species. The experience left a profound impact on the medic as well. He realized that his care had not only saved lives, but had bridged a gap between species, challenging assumptions and traditions that had long dictated actions. Life, in all its forms, could flourish when nurtured with patience, respect, and compassion. He had been a guardian, teacher, and witness to the transformation of both the hatchlings and the alien tribe. By the end of the encounter, the alien tribe formally acknowledged the medic's role. While their pride still lingered, they could not deny the truth before them. The hatchlings were thriving, intelligent, and healthy, because one human had refused to let them die. The tribe agreed to leave them under his care for the time being, recognizing that their survival depended on continued nurturing and protection. The medic watched the hatchlings play and interact, feeling a sense of fulfillment he had never known. The challenge had been immense, the stakes high, and the risks real. Yet, through determination, compassion, and unwavering care, he had protected life, nurtured growth, and influenced understanding across species. The hatchlings had become a living testament to what could be achieved when empathy and patience guided action. As night fell, the outpost glowed softly with the pulsing light of the hatchling scales. They had survived abandonment, defied expectations, and begun to thrive in a universe that had once seemed indifferent. The medic sat quietly, watching over them, knowing that this was only the beginning of their journey. But he also knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, whether from the galaxy, the council, or the complexities of life itself, the bond he had formed with these creatures would guide and protect them. In the quiet of the shelter, with the hatchlings chirping softly and the alien tribe observing respectfully, the medic understood something profound. Life, once abandoned, could be saved. Trust, once broken, could be rebuilt. And compassion, when steadfast, could change not only the fate of the vulnerable, but also the perspectives of even the proudest beings in the galaxy. The days after the alien tribe's visit were calm, but full of quiet anticipation. The hatchlings, now thriving, had begun to show abilities that were both astonishing and beautiful. Their wings, once fragile, now carried strength and grace. Their scales shimmered in dazzling patterns, each individual displaying a unique glow that pulsed softly with their emotions. The human medic watched them every day, carefully noting their growth, their intelligence, and the subtle ways they communicated with one another. He had learned to understand their small chirps, their gentle wing twitches, and even the pulsing of their bioluminescent scales. Each signal conveyed a message: curiosity, happiness, hunger, or a request for comfort. He marveled at how quickly they had adapted, how resilient and intelligent they were. Even the once timid hatchlings now approached him eagerly, nuzzling his hands and curling around his arms as he worked. The bond they had formed was undeniable, a quiet trust built on patience and care. The alien tribe had left a day earlier, but their impact lingered. The lead alien had formally acknowledged the medic's role in preserving the hatchlings' lives. They had left with a promise to monitor from a distance, respecting his guidance while learning from his approach. For the medic, this meant both relief and responsibility. He knew that the hatchlings were safe for now, but he also understood that their survival depended on continued care and vigilance. One morning, as the medic entered the shelter, he found the hatchlings gathered near the center, their wings spread slightly as if welcoming him. One of them, the smallest and once weakest, attempted to climb onto his shoulder, chirping softly in a rhythm he had come to recognize as joy. Another pulsed its scales in a gentle pattern, signaling excitement. The sight filled him with warmth. The creatures he had saved were not only alive but thriving, full of personality and energy. Feeding had become an interactive ritual. The hatchlings anticipated his arrival, moving into position and signaling their readiness. The medic carefully distributed food in small, precise portions, watching how each hatchling ate and adjusted to the environment. Occasionally, they would pause, chirp softly, and tilt their heads, as if communicating their preferences or asking for comfort. He responded in kind, adjusting the temperature, the airflow, and the lighting, ensuring their continued well-being. As the hatchlings grew, the medic introduced safe spaces for exploration. Small platforms, soft mats, and gentle ramps allowed them to exercise their wings and test their strength. One hatchling attempted its first short flight, flapping its wings with determination before landing carefully on a padded surface. Medic cheered quietly, knowing that each success was hard-earned and vital for their development. Over the next few weeks, their abilities became even more remarkable. The hatchlings began to coordinate with one another, playing together in ways that resembled strategy and understanding. They pulsed their lights in synchronized patterns, chirped in harmony, and practiced short flights that required coordination and awareness. The medic observed, amazed at their intelligence and adaptability. He realized that these creatures, once abandoned and near death, were now capable of feats that reflected both survival instinct and innate brilliance. The hatchlings' growing confidence also allowed them to interact more with the environment outside the shelter. The medic prepared a safe outdoor enclosure within the outpost, ensuring that temperature, airflow, and safety measures were carefully controlled. The creatures explored cautiously at first, wings fluttering and scales pulsing in response to new stimuli. Slowly, they gained confidence, hopping and gliding across the open space, their interactions filled with curiosity and joy. While their development continued, the medic also faced challenges. Sudden environmental changes, equipment malfunctions, or small mistakes could threaten their progress. One afternoon, a minor temperature fluctuation caused a brief period of stress. The hatchlings huddled together, wings quivering. The medic acted quickly, adjusting the environment, monitoring their vital signs, and soothing them with gentle words. The experience reminded him that vigilance was crucial and that care required constant attention. Despite the challenges, the bond between the medic and the hatchlings grew stronger. They had come to recognize him as their protector, their teacher, and their source of safety. Each touch, each adjustment, each gentle word reinforced their trust. And he, in turn, had grown attached to them in ways he could never have imagined. Their presence brought joy, purpose, and a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the ordinary. The alien tribe, keeping their distant watch, sent occasional transmissions expressing interest in updates. The medic reported on the hatchlings' health, growth, and development, careful to maintain transparency while ensuring the creature's safety. The tribe, though initially skeptical, had begun to appreciate the value of his care. They had seen firsthand that life could flourish when nurtured with patience, empathy, and attention to detail. One evening, as the medic observed the hatchlings resting in a cluster, he noticed a subtle change. Their scales glowed more brightly, patterns shifting and flowing with what seemed like intelligence. The smallest hatchling, once fragile and timid, now pulsed in a pattern that resembled recognition and connection. The medic realized that these creatures had not only survived, they had begun to express individuality, awareness, and a sense of belonging. The future, he knew, would hold new challenges. The Galactic Council continued to observe. The alien tribe maintained its distant watch, and the outpost environment was inherently unpredictable. But the hatchlings were now strong, intelligent, and resilient. They had survived abandonment, defied expectation, and grown under his care into beings capable of navigating the world around them. With each passing day, the hatchlings' abilities became more pronounced. They demonstrated instinctive coordination, reacting to minor changes in their environment with impressive precision. Their interactions with one another revealed an understanding of social behavior and cooperation. The medic watched, often in quiet awe, as the creatures learned from each other, adapting and evolving with a speed that highlighted both intelligence and instinct. The medic took time to teach them gently, introducing simple cues, safe spaces for exploration, and interactive exercises that encouraged their growing abilities. They responded eagerly, learning to associate patterns, sounds, and movements with guidance and care. Each new skill they mastered was a small triumph, reinforcing the bond that had formed between them and the human who had saved them from certain death. The alien tribe eventually returned, not with hostility, but with curiosity and respect. They observed the hatchlings' progress, noting the remarkable growth, intelligence, and coordination. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to acknowledgement, recognizing that the human medic had not only preserved life, but had guided it in a way that honored its potential. The tribe began to understand that their earlier abandonment had been a mistake and that care, patience, and compassion were essential to life's preservation. For the hatchlings, the presence of the alien tribe did not create fear. They remained confident, demonstrating trust in the medic while responding positively to the cautious gestures of their species. The interaction highlighted the potential for harmony between humans and alien life when care, respect, and understanding guided their actions. In the quiet of the outpost, with stars twinkling above and the soft glow of the hatchling scales illuminating the shelter, the medic felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had faced incredible challenges, defied expectations, and nurtured life in its most vulnerable form. The hatchlings, once abandoned and near death, had grown into beings full of potential, intelligence, and energy. As night fell, the hatchlings nestled together, wings folded and scales pulsing softly. The medic sat quietly, watching over them, knowing that their journey had only just begun. They had survived abandonment, defied rigid traditions, and thrived under care that bridged species and cultures. Their future, though uncertain, was now full of possibility, guided by trust, patience, and the unwavering protection of the human who had saved them. In that moment, the medic realized something profound. Life, when nurtured with care and compassion, could overcome neglect, tradition, and expectation. The hatchlings were living proof of resilience, growth, and the transformative power of trust. And as he looked at their small, vibrant forms, he understood that their journey was no longer defined by abandonment, but by the strength, guidance, and protection that had given them a new beginning. For the first time, he allowed himself to relax, knowing that the hatchlings were safe, strong, and capable of thriving. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and their lives now held promise beyond what anyone could have imagined. In saving them, he had changed not only their fate, but had demonstrated the profound impact of care, courage, and unwavering commitment to life itself.